In this video tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at Microsoft Access Forms. What are Microsoft Access Forms, you might ask? They're a type of simple database application that allows us to provide a more user-friendly interface to our database. For users like us, who've been studying information systems and databases, it's not a big deal to go in and add or edit a few rows in our database manually. But if we were to share this database with our other employees, or people that don't have the same sort of background with Microsoft Access, that might be a bit intimidating for them. Forms allow us to make a custom interface for our database that have more rules and constraints, and make things a little bit simpler for our employees to enter, edit, and view data. This video is a direct continuation of the Microsoft Access video tutorial, which covered turning the university ERD example into a database. So that means you should watch that video if you've not done so already to get the most out of this one. Once you've watched that, download the Western database from OWL, open it up to the student table, and follow along as we add a form application. So we're going to start with that Western example that we've been working with, and right now we're looking at the student table. Before we get into forms, we're going to add a new field to the student table. So I'm going to switch over to Design View. We're going to call this field Can Graduate. And what this is going to represent is if the student has completed all the obligations and requirements and can graduate in the next convocation. And instead of using like a text field or a number field, this time we're going to use a yes or no field. And this basically just stores a binary choice, either yes or no, a true or a false, something like that. So we're going to save, and we'll go back to Datasheet view. You can see now that there's checkboxes. So we'll check a few of these examples. And we're going to say that if it's checked, they're ready to graduate. Otherwise, they still have more courses or requirements to complete. Save that and close. Now we want to create a custom form that allows maybe the registration secretary to enter in new students into the database. So we're going to hit on Create. And there's a few options here for creating forms. So for us, since we're beginners to Excel, or beginners to Access rather, we're going to probably want to use the form wizard, which is going to help us along a little bit. So the first question it's asking is what table are we making this form for? So we're going to select student because we want a way to enter in new students. And here is asking what fields are we going to have available to view and to edit. So we could add these one by clicking the arrow. Or we could hit this double arrow just to move everything at once. So everything on the right hand side selected field is going to automatically add a entry spot in our form where that data could be entered for that field. So now it's going to basically ask us what template we want to use. So these are different sort of layouts. So we're just going to start with the default first one because we're going to be moving stuff around ourselves. Asks us what we want to call it. We can just call it student reg. And it's now asking if we want to open it in view mode. So view it like we would be if we were entering data, or if we want to start modifying the design. So we'll start with viewing it. So you can see it's made like a default form. And this sort of looks a little bit like the datasheet view, except we're only looking at one student at a time. And we have the same navigation controls down here. And they basically allow us to go back and forth through the records. So if we click this little next record button, it goes to the next student in the database. And I keep clicking, and I'll go to each one of the students until we eventually get to the end, and we can enter a new student. We can also use these controls to go to the first record or jump to the last record. Or we can jump right to making a new record with this new one here. One thing to notice if we make modifications in here, let's say we call this Jane Smith, we can see as we're editing, we get this little pencil icon that we've seen before in Datasheet view. So that means we're currently editing this record. It hasn't been saved yet. If we want to save it, we have to right click and hit save. Or we could click the save icon up here. So now it's saved, so that change has actually been made to the database. So if we were to look into the student table in Datasheet view, we can see that Jane Doe has been changed to Jane Smith. Form again. So another way to save is if we were to say Jane Smith 2, and we were just to go to the next record, it automatically saves that. So when we go back, that change has been done. So the two ways to save in Form View are either going like right click save, or just going to the next record. It's the same sort of idea as in the datasheet view. So looking at this, there is a few problems and ways we could improve this form. First of all, it's kind of ugly. It's all just like sort of in a column. and it's not very usable. We still have to know what the faculty IDs are to enter them. And it lets us try to edit student number when that's an auto number, so users can't edit auto numbers. So I'm pinned buttons and won't let us edit it, so maybe we don't even want to have that option of even trying. Could confuse someone that's not used to what an auto number is. So let's go into our design view. And in design view, we're looking at basically all these fields that are available, as well as what we call labels. So the labels are the text that's just written directly onto the form. So it literally says student number or student num. That would be a label. And on the right hand side here are fields where it's going to insert the different values that we can edit. So we can start by trying to edit these labels. So you just click on them, and then you're allowed to edit them any way you want. So they're just text, and changing these doesn't change the name of the field. They just start as the name of the field by default. So we can change this to date of birth. In some cases, these field names might not be as descriptive as you want. So I'm just making these a little more easy to understand. Maybe we want to change the title up here. So we can also change the formatting of these labels. So we just changed the text that's in them. We can also change the formatting of them. So we do that by clicking on this Format tab. And this brings up the Format ribbon. So now once we highlight something like this title here, we can edit it just like we would in Word or Excel. So we could change the font color. We could change it to be bold. Change the font size. And we can change what font it is. Maybe we'll go with Broadway. So you notice it's a bit cut off right now. So I can change the size of the label by just sort of hovering over that dot and dragging it. Drag it a bit more. And we can change the size of our overall form by clicking on the edge here and then dragging it to the right or left. So I just made the whole form wider. And we can also make format changes to all these down here too. So one good idea is usually to color the fields that are required a different color, just so the user knows that they have to input data there. So we might color these ones red. If I remember correctly, these were the required fields. We'll make them bold too. We'll give student number special color because that's done automatically. So if we were to switch back into the normal form view, so form view is what we use to actually interact with the form, like enter data, and design view is what we use to edit the form itself. So if we switch into form view, we can see those changes have been made to the form, and they apply to basically any record we're looking at. We can still make this a lot better, so let's switch back to design view. One thing we might want to do is sort of brand it for our organization. So one thing we can do to do that is insert an image. So it has a nice insert image button here. It has a list of ones I've already used, but you can also browse. In this case, we'll go to desktop and we'll insert this Western logo, and then you can draw where you want it. So there, we have a nice Western logo in the top right. And we can also apply formatting to these different fields here. So we go to the Format tab. We can change the background color and change the font color. Required fields will have red, and we'll do a nice purple for the ones that aren't required. Oh, change the background one by accident there. When we take a look again at it in form view, we can see that the formatting has taken effect. And again, this is just formatting of the form itself. It doesn't actually affect anything in the database. We're just trying to make our form look better right now. So the first thing we might want to fix, other than just formatting, is this being able to try to edit the student number, even though we can't do that because it is an auto number. So we're going to go back to design view. And when you click on a field, you notice that this thing changes over to the right here. This is called the property sheet. And if this isn't coming up for you by automatically, all you have to do is click this property sheet on the design tab. So make sure you're on the design tab and you have the design ribbon open and click property sheet. And over here, you'll see properties of whatever you have currently selected. So if you're selecting a label, it'll show you properties of the label. If you're selecting a field, it'll show you the properties of the field. And there are quite a few properties for each field. So this is sort of like metadata for the form element. And it's important to note that this is different than metadata for the field in the table. This is just metadata for what's specifically on your form. And this would have things like the highlighting, the font colors, as well as how we can interact with it. So there's quite a lot here, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of it, but it is quite flexible, so you might want to play around with it a bit and see what you can do. Right now, we want to make it so the user can't interact with this student number at all. So we do that under the Data tab, and we can see that there's an option called Enabled. So right now it says yes. We're going to switch that to no. You can see it's sort of graded out a little bit. And when we switch back to the view, the form view, we can see now we can't interact with student number. It still shows the student number fine. And if we went to create a new one, it's going to say new, and we can enter someone in. Birth, faculty, and then to save, we right click and hit save, and we can take a look, and it has entered it into the student table, and it put in a new auto number. So even with that disabled, auto number is still working fine, and it's something that the user that's putting in the data doesn't really have to interact with at all. So it's probably best to have it disabled like that. They can still see the student number of the new students they enter, and the students that are currently in there, they just can't interact with it. So if there's some other field that you didn't want the user that's using the form to interact with, you could disable it in the same way, just switching enable to no. In this case, we want them to be able to edit everything else. Let's go back to the design view. And the next thing we might want to do is make this a little bit better by moving around some of these fields. Right now, student name's quite long, so we can change the size of the box here by just clicking on one of those little boxes and dragging it. So we're going to make it a bit smaller. And then we're going to move its location. Put it up here. And we'll put their date of birth under it. So you can move these around wherever you want. We'll make this a little bit bigger. We'll put their faculty ID down here. Put the registration date up. Bigger. Really, you can organize these however you want. It's whatever suits your needs, whatever you think looks best. And we can see when we go back to form view that those changes have happened. Those fields have been moved to those new locations. We can go back again. So one thing we might want to change is right now these dates, they're okay, but they're not in like the most readable format. So we can change how they're displayed. So go switch back to design view. We're going to click on those date fields. And this time we're going to click on the Format tab in the property sheet. Now the very first option is Format, and this works very similarly to the format for table fields, except they're not going to be affecting the table at all. They're just going to be affecting how we view them in our form. So it has a few built in for us, so we can select maybe long date. We'll do the same thing for the registration date. Go with the long date. And we might need to make this a bit bigger. So we'll expand this a bit. I'll move this one over a bit. This is somewhat fiddly. You have to keep playing around with it a lot to get your exact layout. A lot of it just involves sort of moving things around to see what looks okay. So now when we go back to form view, we can see the format of these dates have changed. So instead of being in that format with dashes, it now has the full month name written out for us. Back into design view. Maybe I want to make this a little bit smaller. Okay. So the best way to sort of learn this form stuff is a lot of trial and error. Know what you want to try to do, try changing a few things in the property sheet. If that doesn't work, maybe take a look at your notes from the class, Google the problem, or even post on the forums, and then try again to see if you can get the result that you want. Now, this can graduate box is a little bit confusing. It might not be 100% clear what the checkbox means, so we can make it a little more blatant. So go back to design view, and we're actually going to delete this for now. So I'm just going to have it highlighted and click the delete button, and we're going to remove it. Instead, we're going to replace it with a different kind of input. So you can see this box up here has all the different kinds of inputs we can use on our form, or the different kinds of components we can add to our form. So what we've been seeing so far is this sort of text field, where a user can just enter in some short text. What we're going to try now is this option over here, which is an option group. So this allows the user to select from one of a few choices. So we're going to click on that and drag it onto our form. And a wizard's going to pop up and allow us to customize this a little bit. So this is going to be an option to select if they can graduate, and we want to give them the option of yes or no. So the first option will be yes. Second option will be no. And we click next. We can select a default choice. We're going to make that no. Then it's going to tell us what the actual value is. So this is the label that's displayed on the form, yes and no. But this would be the value that's actually going to be tried to store in the database. So we want yes to be yes, and we want no to be no. So you notice that it automatically switched the yes to -1 and the no to 0. That's because that's how Access stores yes and no for those yes and no fields. So that's fine, we'll leave it like that, hit next. And this is a very important choice. So it's saying, where do we want to save this? So we want to save this, and we want to select the field in the table where it's going to be saved, and that's the can graduate field. So it's very important when you're adding a new component to your form that you select the correct field and where you're going to save it. So in this case, we want to save this yes or no option into the can graduate. And that gives us a few options for customizing this. So we can change the look, like the border around it. I'm just going to go with etched, and you can switch between checked boxes or option boxes. So option boxes require them to only pick one choice, while check boxes would allow them to pick multiple choices. Since this is for a yes and no field, we have to go with option boxes. Since it's either yes or no, it can't be both. And we can say what we want to call it, what caption we want to put in front of it. So we're going to say, can this student graduate? And click finish. And you can see that we now have this new component that's titled, can this student graduate? And it has yes and no. So one important thing to note is when we first add new components to our form like this, Access is just going to give them a default name. And this is a special name where how you refer to these when we're trying to set up tab orders and things like that we'll get to. And you can see the name that's given it up here. It's called it label 17. And if we look at the option box here, it's called it frame 16. So these aren't really descriptive. So one thing you might want to do is go to the Alt tab and give it a different name. In this case, I'm going to call it Can Graduate Box. And that just changes the name. And we'll see why that will be helpful later. So if we switch back to the form view, we can see instead of that other checkbox, we now have can the student graduate and a yes/no selection. And it should save this. So I selected yes for Jane. We have no for Bob. We'll have yes for Alice. And when we save that and take a look in the student, we can see that it's actually setting these checkboxes for us. So we'll basically change the way how they can enter that. So the next thing we might want to deal with is this faculty ID thing here. So right now they have to input number manually, and it does enforce the referential integrity. If I tried to put like 9, for example, and then go save, we get an error saying that faculty 9 doesn't exist. but still not that useful because I don't know what faculty 1 is off the top of my head. So we want to update this a bit to actually have like a selection of different faculties that actually exist. So we'll go back into Design View. And we're just going to delete it for now because we want a different kind of box. So there's another kind of option up here, and that is the combo box. So this lets us choose one from a list of choices. So we're going to draw that on our form, and a wizard thing will pop up that allows us to customize it. So we have a few options here. In this case, we want a combo box that's going to get values from another table. Because we have a table that's for faculty and it lists all the faculties, so we want that to be live and updated right from that faculty table. So we're going to select the first option. Now we're selecting what table we're going to pull the data from. In this case, we want to list the faculties, so we're going to click on Table Faculty. Now it's going to ask which fields. And it's not asking which fields are we going to store, it's asking which fields are we going to display on the form. So in this case, we want faculty name and not faculty ID. This is asking which fields are going to be displayed in that combo box, not what the actual data that's going to be stored. So we select faculty name because we want actual names, not numbers. And this lets us sort them. So we want to sort by faculty name. So within that combo box, they're going to be sorted by faculty name. And now it's asking us basically where to store this. So we want to say store the values in this field, and we want to store that in faculty ID. So it's not going to be storing the faculty name, it's going to be storing the faculty ID. And it's going to store that in faculty ID. So it's smart enough to handle all of this for us as long as we selected the right options. And we're going to call this faculty. This is the label that's going to display on the form. And you can see we have this big drop box over here. That might be a little bit big. So we'll make it a bit smaller. And we'll make this a bit closer to faculty, the label, and drag it back like that. And then once again, this is called Combo 23 by default. So maybe we'll change the name to Faculty Combo. Hit enter. Now when we view our form in Form View, we can see that instead of just a number, it actually says Sciences. If we look at the drop-down, we have all of those faculties that were available in our faculties table. We could switch Jane Smith to Arts, switch Bob to Sciences. Remember, it's saving when I switch to the next one. When we take a look in the student thing, we can see that it's correctly updated the faculty ID. So Jane Smith was switched to Arts, which I believe was 3. Bob was switched to Sciences, which was 1. And if we were to go into our faculties table and add in a new faculty, and we save that, close that, we go back to student registration, you can see that we now have a business option. Also note that it's not sorting them the same way as they're listed in the table, it's sorting them by the name of the department, and that's because we selected sort by the department name rather than by the primary key or the order they show up in the table. So this is pretty good so far, but one thing you might notice is when we try to tab through it, the order's kind of weird. So it's going from student name, date of birth, then back over to registration date, then down to phone number, then to can graduate, then to faculty of science. So that might not be the tab order we want. Like a more logical order is probably left to right. So it would be like student num, student name, registration date, then date of birth. So we can control the order in which things are tabbed. We do that in the design layout, and there's this tab order button up here. So go to tab order, and it lists all the fields or all the components on your form. And you'll notice that it's using the name that we named them in the property sheet. So if we had left this one is like combo box, and this one is like combo list, they would have just been called like list 32 or combo box 5. So it was important to rename them, just so like, for example, in this view, we actually know what we're changing the order of. So we want to order this in the same way they are left to right. So we have student number, student name, and we want to move registration date, then date of birth, then phone number, then can graduate, and then faculty combo. So this will be the order, that's what we call the tab order, that goes in when you're hitting the tab key. We hit OK, go back to form view. Now when we hit tab, it's going in the right order. so it's not skipping to date of birth and then going back to registration date. So it is quite useful when you're making forms to make sure your tab order is logical, usually left to right. And that makes it a lot easier for the users entering the data. Because usually you're not going to want to click on each one of these fields manually, you're going to want to be using tab to do it as efficiently as possible. So a good tab order will help that. So the next thing we can see is using this navigation bar at the bottom. It's a bit of a pain, and you have to find this little button and click on it each time when you want to skip ahead. So maybe we can start adding some controls to our form that will help with navigation. We'll go back into the design view, and now we're going to add a different kind of component that we haven't seen yet called a button. That's what this icon is. So we're going to draw up a button right here. We kind of draw the size we want it, and it's going to come up with a wizard that gives us a few options. And these are all the options that we can have that will what our button will do when the user clicks on it. So these ones are going to be navigation, and what we want in this case is some navigation options. So maybe we want go to the next record or go to the previous record. So next, it allows us to either we can make this a text-based button where it shows text, in this case it's showing previous record, or we can use a picture. So it has some suggestions by default like this arrow, or we could even browse and find our own picture. In this case we're just going to go with the default arrow. Click next, and in this case we're not having a label, but we're having a name, just like we are naming it in the property sheet. So we're going to call this next button and hit finish. So you can see it's added this little button to our form. And change the size of it. And we're going to make another one. Make it over here. So this one's going to go to the next record. I used the same sort of arrow. Call this next button. I think I misnamed the other one, so we'll call it next button 2 for now. And I'll fix the name of this. So if you misname something like I just did, just edit it in here. Prev button. And we can change the size of this. So if you're doing this in real life, you'd probably want to put a little more effort into making things the same size and stuff like that. So we go back to form view, and then we can use these buttons to go through the records back and forth. And when we get too far to one side, it'll just say you can't go any further. And if we get all the way to this side, it'll start putting in a new one. So that's good, but we might want to have easier way to save our records, because it would be kind of a pain for the person entering them if they want to save, to click save, right-click save, and it might be not that intuitive. So we can add a save button and a few other features. So we're going to go back to design view. We're going to add a button. This will be our save button. So you notice that there are other categories here. So there's record operations, form operations. There's a whole bunch of different options. There's even things like printing to a file or printing the report and things like that. In this case, we just want to save the record. So we could either do with a check mark, or we could do a save icon. Let's go with the check mark. Call this save button. Save button on our form. We'll add another button. This one is going to be an add record button. So this button's going to skip to the end to add a new record. And we can even add a delete option for a way for them to delete the record. So we'll add another button for that. Put it over here. Record options, delete record, place trash can, delete button, and we'll add that to our form too. Save, and we'll go to form view. So now you can see all these buttons are showing up on our form. The checkbox would save any changes, so we call this Jane Smith 2. I'll click that, it would now be saved. We have the previous and back. If we hit the new button, it's going to go to the end, allow us to enter a new record, so we can enter a new one. So enter some gibberish for now. Date of birth. And we can pick a faculty for them. Hit save. So that entered a new record. Take a look at it. You can see this gibberish record here. And we can use our delete button to delete it. It's going to ask, are we sure? Hit yes. And if we take a look at the student datasheet, we can see that we removed it. So one thing you'll notice now that we have these buttons is that they're included in our tab order. And they're not quite in the right tab order. So they're going to like jump all over. So there's a few things we could do to fix that. One thing I'm going to do first of all is faculty ID is required. So let's color that red. Just so we can keep our conventions going. So next, we could change the tab order. If we go into design, so we have all these buttons now in our tab order, and we can change the tab order there. But we probably don't even want these buttons in our tab order. Like, we don't want them to go to the next one. As soon as we get to the last faculty ID field and we hit tab, we probably want to go to the next record. We don't want to start going through all these buttons. It could even be dangerous because one of them would go to the delete button. So one thing we could do to get them out of the tab order, so we click on them and look in the property sheet, click on the other tab, and you'll see that there's an option called tab stop. So this means, will this be part of the tab order? Will we stop there when we're hitting tab? So if we switch this to no, we can do that for all of these. It means that when we're hitting tab, it's not going to go to that button. Just end up going to the next record before we start highlighting these buttons. It's important to note that they'll still be listed in this tab order list, but they won't have any effect. So when we go to the form view, we're on the first record right now, and right now we have student name selected, so when we start hitting tab, and when we're on faculty and we hit tab now, we just jump to the next record. So these buttons aren't part of the tab order. So this isn't too bad for our student registration form. So now we're going to move on and make a form for the professor table. So I'm going to close this form. We're going to take a look at the professor table in the datasheet view. So we have two professors in here, and there's not much in here. There's the professor ID, there's the professor name, there's the degree. Right now, Joe Bloggs is set to cat. Let's make that something that's a little more sensical. So the MBA. And to create a form, we hit create. We're going to use that form wizard again. It's already selected professor. We could select a different table, but we want one for professor. Going to add everything over. Then try a different layout by default this time, justified. Call this professor edit. And we're going to go right into design view this time. So this is our professor edit form, and we could do a little bit of customization. So we would know we don't want the professor ID to be editable. So we're going to go over to data. We're going to say enabled no. Professor name is required. Format, make it nice and red. Bold. I think the degree is required too. Bold. Okay, so let's take a look at how that looks when we're actually in form view. So in this case, we're using a more like tabular or tabular-like layout. So we can edit in here. So that would edit my name, just like we would before. It's just changing how we're sort of looking at it, because we're using that different template. If we looked in the professor table, you can see that it's actually edited my name. So we'll set that back. Okay, so one issue we have with this, other than not having any navigation buttons, but we've already seen how we can add those, is that the user could enter whatever they want for the degree. So this could be like switch back to cat or something silly like that, which doesn't make sense. So maybe we want to restrict what they can actually select for a degree. So we'll go into design view. Maybe we'll even make the name a bit smaller. That was kind of silly how much space we had for a name. So we're sort of breaking up that tabular view. The main issue we're trying to fix is that degree, because they can just enter whatever they want right now. What we could do is we can get rid of degree, and we can switch it with a combo box like we saw before. So before we were pulling values from another field, but in this case we don't have a table of degrees. So instead of saying pull from a table, we're going to say we want to type in the values we want. So now we can enter whatever possible values we want to be selectable. So we could say PhD, MBA, C. Let's say and maybe like a none option. Basically, we list all the values we want to be selectable. We hit next, and we remember we have to select where we want to store this. And we want to store this in the degree field. So we're saying whatever they selected, we're going to store that text in the degree field in the table. And we're going to give this a name. So this is just the label. Hit finish. So it's made it for us. We might want to move it around a little bit. Change the size. Add formatting. There we go. And let's take a look at how that works. So now you can see that it's a drop-down. So you can select from the drop-down. So we can go X record instead of cat. We can select like MBA. You can see that it's actually changing and entering MBA into the table for us. But there's still a problem. For example, we could just type whatever we want, even though there's a drop-down. And next record and back, you can see that it actually saved in cat. So cat's been entered into the table. So there's a way we can prevent that. Go to design view, we click on the combo box, and we go over here and you can see that there's two options, limit to list and allow value list edits. So if we just change limit to list to no, and we have this one select to yes. So we have this yes and this no, limit to list yes. That means we're going to only allow them to select from this list. They can't enter in something else. And we'll see what allow value to list edits in a sec. But for now, we're going to say yes and no. So now when we go over to Professor Blogs here, if we try to type something in, and we try to overwrite it, we could type it in, but then when we try to save or go to the next record, it's going to tell us an error because that's not an allowed value. So they have to choose from one of the values. So we could have a case like degree here where, well, the person's entering on professors and they're trying to find their degree in the list. They might notice that it's not added. They know that they usually shouldn't just be typing whatever in here, but in this case, they might need to add a special degree that hasn't been added yet. So there's a way we can allow the user accessing the form to edit this list. So we go back to design view, click on the combo box, and it says allow value list edits. So we switched this to no before, but when this is on, and we save all that and go back, now if they went to like, let's say, MBA, we call it, maybe there's a special MBA plus degree, and we tried to save that, it's going to give us a slightly different error. It says the text you entered isn't an item in the list. Do you want to edit the items in the list? So now they can click yes, and they can actually change the list values. So if they want to enter a new one, they would type in, oh, it already entered the MBA plus for us, but we could also add like cat if we thought that was a real degree. Hit OK, and then we've edited the list. So that gives the user a way that they could edit it. If we want to be more strict and not let them edit it all, we would change this to no. So I'm not going to improve this professor edit form anymore, even though we could do a lot. We could add more navigation buttons, we could add some logos, make it a bit fancier, but I think we got the main point with the degrees across. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try making a form for a little more complex table, one of these relationship entities. So we're going to start, and we're going to do this with the takes. So remember, the takes relationship entity basically lists what student is enrolled in what course, and the enrollment date and their grade. So we can create it the same way. We go create form wizard. We're going to put everything in for now. I'm going to call it is the table takes, so that's correct. We'll try a different, let's go with the default column one. And we'll go right into the design view. Change the title here. Student courses. Wider. So if we take a look at this form view, we can see that we're stuck at that old, like having to put in foreign key IDs. And we don't want that. Instead, we want to have like nice drop downs like we saw before in the student registration form. So let's switch back to design view. We'll start with student name. So right now it's student number, but we want to have like a list of student names if we're going to want to enroll someone in a course. So let's use a combo. We got the wizard again, and again we're going to want to pull from a table. That table is students, that's where all the student names are. We're going to say we want to be pulling the student names. That's the only field we need selected. We're going to want to sort by student name. And this is the list of student names it's going to pull. And we're going to want to save this. We're going to want to save that in student num. So it's going to be smart enough to change that into the student ID number, and it's going to save it in the student num in the takes table. Give this a name. This is the label. Nicer. Okay, so we take a look. We can see that it shows the student's name. We can pick a different student. So if we want to enter a new entry, if we wanted to enroll a student in a course, we could select from a list. This probably wouldn't be the best option if we had a massive university with thousands of students. But in this case, we only have a few students, so we'll use a combo box. If we had a massive university, we might want to do it by student number. And we still have courses where they have to actually manually select the course ID. So that's the next thing we're going to try to improve. Back to design view. Oh, so we have to exit out of that because we were entering data. Go back to design view. And now we're going to try to replace this course one with an actual course name instead of just a course ID. I'm going to use a combo box again. So again, we want to pull this from a table, and then we want to pull this from the courses table. This one's going to be a bit more tricky because there isn't just a simple name field for a course. Instead, we have like 3 fields that describe a course. We have department, we have the number, and we have the section. So we're going to select all 3 of those. Now in terms of sorting, we can sort by more than one thing. So first we want to sort by department. So it's going to list like all the computer science courses together, then all the arts courses, and so on. Then we want to list by the course number, and then we want to list by section. So all the same sections will be together for the same course. This is going to show us the 3 values. We have the department, we have the number, we have the section that makes up the course. Next, and we're going to want to store this. And that's going to be the course ID. And so smart enough to translate that into the course ID. And we're going to call this just course. And we'll make it look a little bit better. And we'll take a look at the form view. So now it just says comp sci right now, which is a bit weird, but when we click on it, we can see that we have the different courses to select from. It's still not perfect because it's just saying the department name once we select one, but when we look at the table, it actually is updating the course ID correctly. We'd have to save first. So we can make it so we'll display the whole name up here, but it gets into a little bit of an advanced topic that we're not going to quite cover yet in the course, but I'll show you how we can do it for now. Because we're going to have to edit the SQL or the SQL. So what we see in row source is the query statement that the database is doing to pull that data into that combo box. So don't worry if you don't understand this yet, because we're not going to be covering it this week. What I'm going to do is make a slight edit, and I'm going to change basically how that data is being pulled out. And if you remember this % symbol, it's the same meaning as in Excel, and it means that we're going to concatenate. So I'm basically saying instead of selecting department, course, and a section, we're going to concatenate those values together with spaces in between. So this is more advanced than what I expect you to do on an assignment or something like that. You should have an understanding of what this query means after we get into SQL. We can see how that changed it a little bit. It still won't be perfect. You can see that now it shows the correct course name, but when we drop it down, it kind of like blocked everything in like this. So we have these empty columns over here. So we're going to fix that. We go back to form view, or design view rather, and we can see when we look at format, we have column count. Now there's only 2 columns, so we'll change that. And we'll switch back over. And now we have it working like what we want. It says department, course, and then the section. It does that correctly for all of our students. So again, that was probably a little bit more advanced than what we're aiming for right now. So there are a few more things we can do. We'll go and go back to the student form and see what other options we have in design view. So one useful thing is this rectangle tool. And this is just a nice way to graphically separate some information. So we could use this to put a rectangle around the can graduate and faculty, put a rectangle around our navigation buttons. When we take a look at the design view, or rather the form view, we can see that it just added a nice graphical rectangle around different sections. So this can be a good way just to graphically group different options together. And let's go to design view. And there's a few other options up here. So this is just selecting things with a cursor. This is a text box, like we've seen with these. This is a label. So if we want to add more text, we could say made by. We want to just add some text to our form, we could do that. And that would just be text that shows up on all the records. Doesn't affect the database at all. It's just adding a little text. There's other options like adding hyperlinks. There's some advanced stuff that we probably won't get into too closely. There's lines. So if you just wanted a line to separate something, add a line here. That's pretty much what you think it would be. It's just a line that I drew on the form. Probably straighten that out a little bit. Put in a new one. And we have other things like list boxes. We have the checkbox that we saw at the very beginning. You can add pictures. Well, there's picture. And there's a few other options. So if you're interested, you can look more deeply into all of these, but they too get a little bit advanced. The form editor is quite powerful, and there is a big rabbit hole to go down. So for now, we basically just want to concentrate on the things we've seen, sort of editing these different text boxes, having a few different selection options, and some combo boxes, and things like that. So once again, I can't cover absolutely everything because it's so in-depth, but if you do have a question about how you do something specifically, I do recommend looking into the help. Once again, you can get to that through this help tab, type help, and there's some search, and it allows you to search most topics. And if you can't find it there, you can always post it on the forums or ask me. A lot of times, the best way to learn this type of thing is to give it a try yourself. Have a goal in mind, like maybe I want to make a combo box for these faculties, and keep trying a few different ways to do it, and then Google it when you start running into problems. And eventually, learning through trial and error is really helpful, and it really helps you remember how to use the software. That's all I have for you in this tutorial, and that brings us to the end of the video tutorials for this week. If you feel like you need more practice with Access, there are a number of MyLab exercises you can try that involve you creating a database, and they can provide some feedback on your work automatically. Again, these are ungraded, but they're a great way to study and practice using Microsoft Access. As always, if you have any questions about any content covered in this week, please ask questions on the course forums. If you feel like you have a good understanding of these topics, then it's time to move on to working on the assignment. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.